He built an empire from scratch and lost everything in a single night. Desperate, salvation came from the one he had always treated as invisible, his own cleaner. What she knew would change his destiny forever. "Don't touch anything in this room. You are paid to clean, not to exist in here." That's what Raymond Tan told Jiali, the cleaner, the last time he addressed her before losing everything. He didn't even look at her face. He was too busy checking numbers on 3 monitors simultaneously, seated in that leather chair that cost more than Jiali earned in months of work. To him, she was just a shadow that appeared with a bucket and a cloth and disappeared without a trace. Raymond led Lion City Capital, one of the most respected investment firms in the country. His office was on the top floor of a mirrored building in the heart of the financial district, overlooking the entire city. From there, he looked at the world as if he owned everything, and for a long time, he nearly did. That night, however, Raymond's world was about to turn upside down. It all started when the monitors flickered. First, it was just one, the one on the left, which showed a strange message in red letters. System failure. Raymond frowned. In years in the financial market, he had seen systems crash before. It was nothing major, but then the second monitor went dark, and then the third, and the phone rang. Mr. Tan. The voice on the other end belonged to Calvin Lim, the company's chief technology officer. "We need to talk now. In person." Raymond felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. When Calvin entered the room, he wasn't alone. He brought Patricia Go, the chief financial officer, with him, and both had the same expression on their faces. The expression of someone about to deliver news that will destroy someone. "Just say it, Raymond," he ordered, standing behind his desk like a general about to receive a war report. Calvin took a deep breath. "Our security system has been compromised. Someone accessed the platform from within the company and transferred virtually all our clients' funds to overseas accounts." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. "How much?" Raymond asked, his voice too low for someone who always spoke as if the world needed to listen. Patricia opened a folder with trembling hands. $187 million. Everything that was in operation today was drained. Nothing left in the operational accounts. Raymond didn't move, didn't yell, didn't throw anything on the floor, as he always did when something went out of control. He simply stood still, looking at Patricia as if she had spoken in another language. $187 million. All the client's money, all the company's assets, everything. "That's impossible," he finally said. But his voice no longer held authority. "Our system has layers of protection. No one gets in without triple authorization." "Exactly," Calvin replied. And that's when the real bomb dropped. Whoever did this had authorization. It was someone from within, someone with full access. Raymond sank into his chair as if his legs had simply stopped working. Who? We don't know yet. We're tracking. But whoever did this knew exactly how to erase their tracks. It will take time. Time is what we don't have. Raymond finally exploded, slamming the table so hard that his coffee mug flew to the floor and shattered into pieces. "When the clients find out, I'm finished. The company is finished." Patricia approached cautiously. "Mr. Tan, there's one more thing. The external audit scheduled for next week has been brought forward." "Tomorrow," Raymond repeated, the words sounding like a death sentence. "And there's another problem," Calvin added, avoiding Raymond's eyes. "The backup server was also compromised. We have no record of operations from the last few months. Without those records, we can't prove the money was stolen. To the auditors, it will look like we embezzled it." Raymond held his head in his hands. In a matter of minutes, his entire life had collapsed. It wasn't just the money. It was his reputation. It was years of work. It was everything he had fought for since he started the company with nothing but a borrowed desk and a phone. The news spread through the office in minutes. Employees began exchanging nervous glances in the hallways. Phones rang incessantly. Some were already updating their resumes on company computers, not even trying to hide it. Wei Leng, the receptionist, was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "If this company goes down, we go down with it. I have bills to pay." "I heard he lost everything," whispered Marcus Lee, one of the younger analysts, to a group gathered near the water cooler. $187 million. "Everything disappeared from the system, and the audit is tomorrow," added Sharon Tan from the legal team. "If they don't find answers, this will become a police case, and we could be investigated too." The panic was real. Not only Raymond's future was at stake, but the jobs and reputations of everyone in that building. Amidst all this confusion, in the hallway downstairs, Jia Li silently pushed her cleaning cart. She heard the comments, the nervous conversations, the phones ringing non-stop. It was none of her business. It never was her business. She was there to clean floors, empty bins, and be invisible, as Raymond made a point of reminding her whenever their paths crossed. Jia Li had worked at Lion City Capital for some years. She was employed by an outsourced company and earned little more than the minimum wage. She woke before sunrise, took 2 buses, and arrived at the building when it was still dark. She cleaned 3 entire floors by herself every day, without complaining. No one there knew anything about her, beyond the name on her badge. No one asked. No one cared. But Jia Li knew everything about them. She knew that Calvin, the CTO, spent hours on the phone with his wife, fighting about money. She knew that Patricia hid empty bottles in her desk drawer and arrived in the morning with red eyes. She knew that Hui Leng, the receptionist, cried in the bathroom almost every week, and above all, she knew that Raymond Tan treated every person in that office as a disposable part. She knew because she was invisible, and when you're invisible, people talk as if you don't exist. That night, while cleaning the hallway near Raymond's office, Jia Li heard something that made her stop her cart. "The backup has been compromised, Raymond. We can't recover it." Calvin's voice echoed through the half-open door. "Whoever did this used an encryption protocol our system doesn't even recognize. I've never seen anything like it." "Then hire someone who has seen it," Raymond shouted. "Bring me the best specialist in the country, in the world if necessary." "I've tried," Calvin replied. "I've called every digital security firm I know. No one has immediate availability, and the type of encryption used is extremely rare. We're talking about a level of sophistication that very few people in the world master. Very few." "Then find those very few and bring them here," Raymond yelled. "Raymond, do you understand what I'm saying? It could take weeks, months." "I don't have months. I don't even have hours. The audit is tomorrow." Jia Li stood in the hallway, the damp cloth forgotten in her hand. Her heart pounded fast, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. A kind of recognition, a familiarity that came from a long way off, from another life she had buried to survive. She knew that kind of encryption, not because she had read about it in some magazine, not because someone told her, but because many years before pushing cleaning carts down company hallways that didn't even know her surname, Jia Li had been one of the brightest minds in digital security in the country. But that was a secret she guarded like a scar, a past too painful to remember. Jia Li looked at her own hands. Hands that had once typed complex codes on state-of-the-art keyboards were now chapped from too much cleaning product. Hands that had once presented solutions at international conferences now carried buckets and mops. Life had not been kind to her, not since that day. She took a deep breath and continued pushing the cart. It wasn't her problem. It never was her problem. Raymond could sort out his lost millions and his broken monitors. She had her own battles, but as she was about to turn the corner, something made her stop again. "If we don't solve this by tomorrow, it's not just me who will fall." Raymond's voice was different now. It was no longer the voice of the arrogant boss who barked orders. It was the voice of a broken man. "There are 120 families who depend on this company. 120 families who will be left with nothing." Jia Li closed her eyes. 120 families. People like her. People who woke up before dawn, took crowded buses, worked all day for a salary that barely paid the bills. People who were innocent, but would be the first to suffer the consequences. She thought of Hui Leng, the receptionist who cried in the bathroom. She thought of Marcus Lee, the youngest analyst, who had just been hired and was counting the days until his first paycheck. She thought of all those faces who passed her every day without saying good morning, but who were still people, people with families, people with bills to pay, people with dreams. Jia Li opened her eyes and looked at the half-open door to Raymond's office. Every fiber of her body told her to turn her back and leave. He had never done anything for her, never treated her like a person, never even looked her in the eye. But Jia Li was not like Raymond. She let go of the cleaning cart in the hallway, adjusted her uniform, and walked to the door. She knocked 3 times. Raymond, Calvin, and Patricia turned at the same time. When they saw who it was, the expression on their faces was one of total confusion. "Excuse me," Jia Li said, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "I know it's none of my business, but I overheard about the system problem." Raymond stared at her as if she had just landed from another planet. "You? What do you know about systems?" "I know it sounds strange," she continued without backing down. But the encryption protocol Mr. Lim described, I know it. Calvin let out a nervous laugh. Are you serious? It's military-grade encryption. There are maybe 20 people in the world who… I know how many people master that protocol, Jiali interrupted. And there was something in her voice that made Calvin swallow the rest of his sentence. Because I helped develop it. The silence that filled that room was so profound that Raymond could hear the ticking of his watch. Patricia looked at Calvin. Calvin looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at Jiali, and for the first time in years, he truly saw her. Not the cleaner, not the shadow, not the invisible woman with the bucket and cloth. He saw someone who might be able to save everything. That frightened him more than losing $187 million. The silence in that room lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Raymond continued to stare at Jiali, as if trying to fit two pieces that didn't belong to the same puzzle. On one side, the cleaner he told to get out of the way every day. On the other, a woman who had just claimed to have helped create one of the world's most advanced encryption protocols. Is this some kind of joke? Raymond asked, crossing his arms. Because if it is, I'm not in the mood. It's no joke, Mr. Tan, Jiali replied, maintaining her firm posture, even with 3 pairs of incredulous eyes fixed on her. I worked at the Zenith Institute for Advanced Technology. I was chief research scientist of the Applied Cryptography Laboratory for years. Calvin shook his head, almost laughing. Zenith Institute? That's one of Southeast Asia's most important research centers. You want us to believe you left there to clean offices? I don't want you to believe anything, Jiali said without altering her tone. I'm telling you what I know. What you do with that information is your problem. But that protocol that's blocking access to your system was developed by my team. I know every line of that structure because I wrote its foundation. Patricia turned to Calvin with wide eyes. Is that possible? Calvin ran a hand over his face, visibly torn between skepticism and desperation. The protocol in question was partially published in academic journals, but the full version was never disclosed. If she really worked on the development… If I really worked on it? Jiali interrupted, and for the first time her voice trembled. Not from fear, but from something much deeper. I gave my entire life to that project. I sacrificed things you can't even imagine. And when everything was ready, when the protocol was finalized and sold to companies worldwide, do you know what happened to me? No one answered. They erased my name, put another researcher as the main author. They said I was just an assistant, and when I complained, when I demanded the recognition that was rightfully mine, I was fired for insubordination. The words came out as if they had been locked away for years behind a bolted door. Jiali took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. Raymond noticed her hands trembling slightly, not from nervousness, but from the pain of reliving something that had clearly destroyed her inside. I sued the institute, she continued, her voice now lower. I spent everything I had on lawyers. I sold my apartment. I sold my car. I used every cent of my savings, and I lost. I lost because they had money to hire the best legal firms in the country, and I had nothing left. And then? Patricia asked, genuinely moved. Jiali swallowed hard before continuing. Then no one wanted to hire me. My name was tarnished in academic circles. They spread rumors that I was unstable, problematic, that I invented stories. Doors that had once opened for me began to close one after another. I sent resumes to technology companies, universities, research centers. Nothing, no response. She paused and looked at her own hands. Those hands that carried buckets and cleaning products every day. I had a son to raise alone. I needed to put food on the table. When the cleaner assistant position came up, I didn't think twice. It was that or starve. The entire office seemed to have stopped breathing. Calvin had uncrossed his arms and was now looking at Jiali with a completely different expression. Patricia's eyes were moist. Even Raymond, the man who never showed anything but authority, was in absolute silence. But Raymond's mind worked like that of a businessman, not like that of a human being with empathy. He processed information, seeking advantages, not feelings. All right, he said, breaking the silence with that practical tone he used in business meetings. Assuming all this is true, assuming you really know this protocol, what exactly can you do? Jiali looked him directly in the eye. I can track where the money went, and I can recover the backup server records. How long? Calvin stood up from his chair. A few hours, if I have access to the main system and the server. A few hours? My entire team has been trying for hours and hasn't even identified the source of the invasion. Because your team is looking in the wrong place, Jiali replied with a calm that contrasted with everything around her. This protocol has a characteristic that almost no one knows about. It creates a kind of mirror layer within the system. The data doesn't really disappear, it's moved to a hidden layer that can only be accessed by someone who knows the original architecture. Calvin froze. That made sense. It made so much sense that he felt ashamed for not having thought of it sooner. A mirror layer? That would explain why we haven't found traditional traces. Exactly, Jelly confirmed. Whoever invaded your system used the latest version of the protocol, but the base is the same one I helped build. And every base has a backdoor that only the architect knows. Raymond got up from his chair and walked to the window. The city sparkled below, indifferent to the disaster happening on that floor. Millions of lights, millions of lives, and none of them knew that $187 million had evaporated from within that building. He turned to Jiali. If I give you access to the system and you fail, I lose time I don't have. The audit is tomorrow morning. If you don't give me access, Jiali replied without hesitation. The audit will arrive tomorrow morning and find a $187 million hole with no explanation. And then it won't just be the company you lose. It was the hardest truth anyone had told Raymond that night, and he knew it was true. But it was Patricia who made the decision. Raymond, we have no option. No specialist can come in time. She at least knows the protocol. What's the risk? The risk is giving full access to our system to someone we don't even know if she is who she says she is, Raymond retorted. The system has already been invaded, Calvin mused. What more do we have to lose? Raymond looked at Jiali once more. There stood a woman in a cleaning uniform, hair tied back, hands worn from heavy work, asking for access to the technological heart of his company. Everything about that scene was absurd. Everything was improbable, and perhaps that's exactly why it could be real. All right, he said, and each syllable seemed to cost him a piece of his pride. Calvin, take her to the server room. Give her monitored access. If she touches anything suspicious, shut everything down. Calvin nodded and motioned for Jiali to follow him. When she left the room, Raymond slumped into his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. What are we doing? He murmured to Patricia, handing the company over to a cleaner. A researcher, Patricia corrected in a low voice. Who happens to be working as a cleaner? Raymond didn't respond, but something in those words echoed within him like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. In the server room, Jiali sat down in front of the main computer and, for an instant, remained completely still. Her hands hovered over the keyboard like those of a pianist about to play after years without touching an instrument. The screen glowed in front of her, full of codes and red alerts. Calvin watched closely, arms crossed, still divided between hope and doubt. Two technicians from his team were in the corners of the room, monitoring her every move. If you need anything, Calvin began, but Jiali had already started typing, and when her fingers touched the keys, something extraordinary happened. The speed with which she navigated the system was different from anything Calvin had ever seen. It wasn't just fast, it was surgical. She wasn't looking for paths. She knew exactly where to go. This is, one of the technicians whispered to Calvin, eyes wide. She's accessing layers of the system we didn't even know existed. Calvin didn't respond. He just watched with his mouth slightly open as Jiali dismantled the encryption protocol piece by piece, like someone disarming a bomb she herself had built. Minutes passed. After an hour, Jiali didn't even stop for water. Her eyes never left the screen. Her fingers never stopped moving. And every now and then, she murmured things in a low voice, as if she were talking to the code itself. Found it, she said suddenly, and the word cut through the silence of the room like lightning. Found what? Calvin approached. The mirror layer. The data is all here. Records, transactions, everything. Nothing was destroyed. It was hidden. She turned to Calvin, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes he didn't expect. Tears, not of sadness, but of something much more complex. This code, I recognize the style. Not just anyone wrote this. What do you mean? Jiali looked back at the screen. Her fingers stopped on the keyboard for the first time since she had sat there. I mean that whoever invaded this system didn't learn this protocol from any book. They learned it directly from someone who helped create it. And that means I can recover everything, she said, typing again. But it also means that whoever did this might be closer than you imagine. Calvin felt a shiver run down his spine. Closer? Like within the company? Jiali didn't answer immediately. She was focused on a sequence of commands that made the screen change completely. Numbers began to appear, values, dates, transfer destinations. It was like watching a treasure map unfold in real time. Done, she said, after a few more minutes of intense typing. "The backup records are restored. All transactions from the last few months are here." Calvin almost fell backward. "You restored the entire backup, the files and the transfer logs? We can see exactly where every cent was sent. But there's one thing you need to know before you celebrate." She stood up from the chair and looked at Calvin with a seriousness that made the air in the room heavy. "I managed to trace the origin of the access that made the invasion, the IP, the times, the system entry pattern, and it came from inside this building, from a computer with privileged access. Directorate level." Calvin blanched. "Directorate level? But that means it was someone who sits next to Mr. Tan every day," Jia Li completed. "Someone he trusts." At that exact moment, the server room door opened, and Raymond entered, followed by Patricia. He looked at the screens full of recovered data, then at the paralyzed Calvin, and finally at Jia Li standing in the middle of the room, with the expression of someone who had just unearthed a secret no one wanted to find. "Did you succeed?" Raymond asked. And for the first time, his voice had something that resembled real hope. "I managed to recover everything," Jia Li replied. "But you need to prepare for what comes next, because the person who stole your money is not some outside hacker. It's someone who eats at the same table as you." Raymond looked at Calvin, looked at Patricia, looked at the two technicians in the corner of the room, and for the first time understood that the enemy was not out there. It was inside. The server room seemed to have shrunk. The air was heavy, almost unbreathable, and no one moved. Raymond looked at the computer screen, where the data recovered by Jia Li shone like an X-ray of everything that had gone wrong in his company. Numbers, dates, transferred values, all there. Exposed. Impossible to deny. But it wasn't the numbers that knocked Raymond off his feet. It was the sentence Jia Li had just spoken. "Someone who eats at the same table as you." He scanned each face in that room. Calvin, who had worked with him from the beginning. Patricia, who had managed the finances for years. The two technicians in the corner whose names he didn't even know. And Jia Li, the woman he had treated as if she didn't exist hours earlier, and who now held in her hands the truth that could save or destroy everything for good. "I want to see the records," Raymond said, his voice too controlled for someone who was collapsing inside. "I want to see which machine the access came from." Jia Li returned to the keyboard and opened the entry logs. The screen showed a sequence of accesses to the central system, all made outside business hours, all with maximum level credentials. She pointed to a specific line. These accesses were always made in the same pattern. Nights and weekends, when the office was practically empty. The person used an internal VPN to mask their location, but made a mistake in the last transfer. "What mistake?" Calvin asked, approaching the screen. "Forgot to activate the VPN before initiating the session. The real IP was registered for a few seconds before being masked. Enough time to identify the machine." Jia Li typed a few more commands, and an identification code appeared on the screen. Calvin recognized the format immediately. It was the internal registration that each company computer received when it was registered in the system. "This code belongs to a specific workstation," Calvin said, already opening the equipment database. His fingers trembled as he typed. When the result appeared, he froze. "Whose is it?" Raymond asked. Calvin didn't answer, just kept looking at the screen as if reading his own death sentence. "Calvin," Raymond repeated more firmly. "Whose machine is this?" It's the reserve workstation in the CFO's office," Calvin replied, his voice almost inaudible. "The machine in the executive floor meeting room. Only 3 people have access to that room." All eyes turned to Patricia. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. When she realized everyone was looking at her, her expression slowly changed, from curiosity to understanding, and from understanding to panic. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Don't do this. It's not what you're thinking, Raymond." Raymond turned to her, and now his voice carried something no one in that company had ever heard from him. "Payne, tell me, it wasn't you. It wasn't me, Raymond. I would never do that. The machine is in your area. Only you, Calvin, and I have access to that room. Does that automatically make me guilty?" Patricia retorted, her voice rising. "How long have you known me? I was here when this company didn't even have proper desks. I organized every cent for this company to grow." Raymond approached her, the two face to face. The silence of the others in the room made every word heavier. "Then explain it to me. Explain how someone used a machine locked in a room that only the 3 of us access." Patricia opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears, tears of anger, indignation, fear. She looked at Calvin for support, but he averted his gaze. "Calvin," she called. "You know it wasn't me. Say something." Calvin remained silent. And that silence said more than any accusation. Jia observed everything in silence, sitting in front of the computer. She had no part in that story, knew none of those people, owed nothing to any of them, but something didn't fit. Something in Patricia's reaction was too genuine to be an act, and something in Calvin's silence was too strange to be just caution. "Excuse me," Jia said, interrupting the confrontation. Everyone turned to her. "Before accusing anyone, may I check something else in the records?" Raymond hesitated but nodded. Jia began typing again, this time with even greater speed. Her eyes scanned lines of code with the same naturalness as someone reading a book. After a few minutes, she stopped. The meeting room machine was used for the accesses. That is a fact, but the login used was not Miss Go's. "Whose was it?" Raymond asked. "It was a ghost login, an administrator account that doesn't exist in the company's official record. Someone created this account silently, without the security system detecting it." Calvin frowned. "That's impossible. Only I can create administrator accounts in the system. No one else has that level of permission." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was the kind of silence that arises when the truth begins to change direction. Jia looked at Calvin. "You said only you can create administrator accounts?" "Yes, it's an exclusive permission for the CTO." "Then, can you explain why this ghost account was created using your own credentials?" Calvin's face lost all color. It was like watching a mask fall in slow motion. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "Calvin!" Raymond called, and now the pain in his voice had turned into something much more dangerous. The clarity of someone who is beginning to understand. This is not possible," Calvin stammered. "Someone must have cloned my credentials. Must have hacked my access." "Your credentials are protected by multiple layers of authentication," Jia replied, with surgical calm. "The kind of protection you yourself implemented. To use your credentials, the person would need your password, your physical security token, and biometric confirmation. 3 factors. You don't get that without direct access." "She's lying," Calvin pointed at Jia, his voice shrill. "This woman appeared out of nowhere with this absurd story, and you're believing her? She's a cleaner. A cleaner who in 2 hours did what your entire team couldn't do in a night," Patricia replied. And there was a firmness in her voice that surprised everyone. The tears had dried. Now, it was Calvin who was trembling. Raymond slowly walked towards Calvin. The two had known each other for years. They had built that company together, side by side, from day one. Raymond remembered the sleepless nights, the first contracts, the celebrations when the numbers finally started to grow. Calvin was not just his CTO, he was his friend, or at least that's what Raymond believed. "Calvin," Raymond said, stopping a step away from him. "Look me in the eyes and tell me it wasn't you." Calvin raised his face. His eyes were red, his jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then collapsed. Not all at once. It was gradual, like a building that begins to crack at its foundations. First his shoulders slumped, then his hands began to tremble. And finally the tears came. Silent. Heavy. Laden with something that seemed to be relief and despair at the same time. "I had no choice, Raymond," he whispered, his voice broken. "You don't know what I was going through." Raymond's world, which had already collapsed once that night, collapsed again. But this time it was different. Losing money hurts. Losing trust in someone you considered family destroys. "What were you going through?" Raymond repeated, each word coming out slowly, as if he needed to chew each syllable to keep from screaming. "What could justify stealing $187 million and destroying everything we built?" Calvin leaned against the wall and slid to the floor, his legs too weak to support him. "I got into a situation that spiraled out of control. For months, I had been trying to cover a personal financial hole. I made bad investments, incurred debts, took loans from people who don't accept delays." "Loan sharks?" Patricia asked incredulously. "Dangerous people," Calvin confirmed without raising his face. "They gave me a deadline. They said if I didn't pay, they would go after my family, my wife, my children." "And you thought the solution was to steal from those who trusted you?" Raymond asked. And the question came out more like a punch than words. "I was going to return it." Calvin raised his face, his eyes pleading. "It was supposed to be temporary. I was going to take enough to pay off the debt and then return everything before anyone noticed. But when I saw how much I needed, the hole was too big. And then I panicked and transferred everything." "Where to?" Raymond asked. "To overseas accounts they control. I lost access to the money the moment it left here. Patricia covered her mouth with her hands. You handed $187 million over to loan sharks. I didn't know what to do. They threatened my children, Patricia. What would you do in my place? The silence that followed was devastating. Each person in that room processed the information in a different way. Patricia with horror, Raymond with a mixture of anger and grief, the technicians with the shock of discovering that their boss was the villain, and Jia Li with something no one expected, compassion. She looked at Calvin on the floor, a man destroyed by the weight of his own choices, and saw something the others couldn't see at that moment. She saw a human being who had erred gravely, who had caused enormous damage, but who was suffocating under the weight of a situation he didn't know how to face. Not because she forgave him, but because Jia Li knew very well what it means to be crushed by circumstances that seemed to have no way out. The money, she said, breaking the silence. Everyone looked at her. The accounts to which the transfers were made? If he used the protocol I helped develop to move the funds, there's a chance to trace the final destination. Raymond stared at her. Can you bring the money back? I can locate where it went. Bringing it back is another process. It will require authorities, legal action. But without knowing where it is, you can't do anything. Do it, Raymond said without hesitation. Do whatever it takes. Jia Li nodded and returned to the computer. But before she began typing, she turned to Raymond one last time. Mr. Tan, there's one more thing you need to know. What? The protocol that Calvin used to make the transfers. He didn't have the technical knowledge to operate it alone. That level of sophistication requires specific training. Raymond frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying he had help. Someone from outside taught Calvin how to use the protocol, and that person knew exactly what they were doing because they knew every detail of the original architecture. And who would that person be? Jia Li was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the screen, where lines of code continued to unfold. When she finally answered, her voice was almost a whisper. The only other researcher who worked with me on the protocol's development at the Zenith Institute, the same man who stole my work, erased my name, and destroyed my career. She turned the computer screen so everyone could see. There, in the bottom corner of the transfer logs, was a digital signature, a unique code that every programmer involuntarily leaves on their work, like an invisible fingerprint. I recognize that signature, Jia Li said. And now her voice carried something that went far beyond professional pain. It was personal, visceral, the kind of wound that never heals. This man didn't just destroy my career, he destroyed my entire family. Raymond looked at the screen, then at Jia Li, and understood that this story was much bigger than $187 million. It was about justice, the kind of justice that money can't buy and time can't erase. And Jia Li had waited years for that moment, without even knowing it would come. No one in that room moved after Jia Li uttered that sentence. This man didn't just destroy my career, he destroyed my entire family. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Impossible to ignore, impossible to undo. Raymond leaned against the desk and crossed his arms, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. First, the system failure, then the discovery of the theft, Calvin's confession, and now the revelation that someone from Jia Li's past was behind everything, operating in the shadows, like a ghost she believed she had left behind. I need to know everything, Raymond said, looking at Jia Li. If this person is involved in the theft from my company, I need to know who he is, how he operates, and why he did this. Jia Li took a deep breath. This was the moment she had avoided for years. Talking about the Zenith Institute was opening a wound that had never properly closed, only covered by layers of silence and survival. His name is Victor Wong, she began. And just pronouncing that name, her posture changed. Her shoulders became tenser, her jaw tightened. Her eyes took on a hardness no one there had seen before. When I joined the Zenith Institute, he was already there. He was a senior researcher and had a brilliant reputation in academia. Everyone admired him. He was charismatic, articulate, the kind of person who walked into a room and won everyone's trust in minutes. And you worked together? Patricia asked. In the same lab. When I was assigned to lead the advanced cryptography project, Victor remained on the team as a secondary researcher. Initially, the partnership worked. He had good ideas, contributed creative solutions, but as the project grew, as the results began to attract international attention, something in him changed. Jia Li paused and looked at her own hands on the keyboard. He started presenting himself as the project leader at conferences, gave interviews without mentioning me, published articles using lab data without putting my name on them. At first, I thought it was carelessness, lack of attention. I confronted him privately, and he apologized, said he would correct it, and I believed him. But he didn't correct it, Raymond completed. No, it got worse, much worse. Jiali's voice dropped a tone, as if the next words were too heavy to be spoken at normal volume. When the protocol was ready and began to be negotiated with security companies worldwide, Victor went to the Institute's board and presented the project as his exclusive creation. He had falsified documents, doctored records, and fabricated evidence. He built an entire narrative where I was just a technical assistant following instructions. And the Institute believed him? Calvin asked from the floor, where he was still sitting, his voice hoarse. Jiali let out a bitter laugh, the kind of laugh that had nothing funny about it. The Institute didn't care who created what, they cared who sold better. Victor was handsome, eloquent, had political connections. I was a researcher who spent all day in the lab and didn't know how to play the corporate game. For the board, the choice was easy. And when you reported it? Patricia pressed. When I reported it, Victor had already shielded everything. He placed his people in strategic positions within the Institute. When I filed a formal complaint, I was called to a meeting with the board and treated as if I were the villain. They said I was trying to steal credit for others' work, that I was envious, unbalanced. They used words that made me question my own sanity. Patricia covered her mouth. That's horrible. But the worst wasn't that, Jiali continued, and now her voice began to falter, not from weakness, but from the accumulated weight of years, carrying that pain alone. The worst was what happened to my family. The room fell silent. Even the hum of the servers seemed to have diminished, as if the machines themselves were paying attention. I was married. My husband, Thomas, was a professor at another university. We had a young son, Brian. When the lawsuit against the Institute began, Victor didn't limit himself to attacking me professionally. He started a personal campaign. Jiali swallowed hard before continuing. He spread rumors about me in academic circles, said I was unstable, had psychological problems, invented conspiracies. He sent people to contact the university where my husband worked, insinuating that he was also involved in academic fraud. They did that to your husband? Raymond asked, genuinely shocked. Thomas was suspended from his position while they investigated. He had nothing to do with it, but the mere suspicion was enough to destroy his reputation. He lost his job weeks later. The pressure was so immense that our marriage couldn't withstand it. He blamed me for reporting it. Said I should have kept quiet, and maybe he was right. No, Patricia interrupted firmly. He was not right. You did the right thing. Jiali looked at Patricia with an expression that mixed gratitude and a deep sadness. Doing the right thing comes with a price, Miss Go, and sometimes the price is too high. Thomas left, walked out one day, and never came back. My son had just started school. Suddenly, I was alone, without a job, without money, with a boy who asked every day when his father would return. A tear rolled down Jiali's face, the first she let fall that night. She quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand, as if ashamed to show weakness in front of those people. I sold everything I had to pay the lawyers for the lawsuit. Lost my apartment, my car, my savings, and when I lost the lawsuit, I lost what little dignity I had left. I walked out of the courthouse, with my son by the hand, not knowing where to go. Where did you go? Patricia asked, her voice choked. To my mother's house, Madame Lim, an elderly lady who lived in a small flat in the heartlands, already frail in health. She welcomed us without asking anything, shared the little she had, and it was there, sleeping on a mattress on my mother's living room floor, with my son in my arms, that I decided I would not give up. Jiali straightened her shoulders, as if the memory of that moment returned to her a strength that time had tried to steal. The next day, I went out to look for a job, any job. I knocked on restaurant doors, shop doors, market doors. No one wanted to hire a woman with an academic resume for manual labor. They found it strange, distrusted me, until I found the cleaner assistant position at an outsourced company. They didn't ask for a resume. They just asked that I knew how to use a mop and arrived on time. And that's how you ended up here, Raymond said, more to himself than to her. That's how I ended up here, cleaning the offices of people who look right through me as if I were made of glass. The sentence hit Raymond like a slap. He knew she was talking about him, about all the times he had walked past her without saying good morning, about all the times he had told her to get out of the way, about all the times he had treated her as if she were part of the furniture. And your son? Raymond asked, his voice lower than anyone there had ever heard. Jiali's face transformed. The hardness she had maintained throughout the night dissolved, and in its place appeared something so pure and so fragile that even the technicians in the corner of the room averted their gaze out of respect. "Brian is the reason I'm alive," she said, and every word was both a declaration of love and a cry of pain. "He's a brilliant boy, intelligent, curious, the kind of child who asks questions adults can't answer, and he dreams of being a scientist. He wants to invent things that help people." She paused, breathing deeply to maintain control. "Every day he sees me leave before dawn and return at night, with my back aching and my hands chapped. And every day he hugs me at the door and says the same thing. Mummy, one day I'm going to invent a machine that cleans everything by itself, so you never have to work so hard again." He has no idea that his mother has already invented things the whole world uses. Patricia couldn't hold back. Tears streamed down her face without any effort to stop them. Even Calvin on the floor, with all the guilt he carried, had moist eyes. Raymond turned his back and walked to the window. He stood there for long seconds, looking at the illuminated city below. Millions of lights, millions of lives, millions of stories like Jiali's, happening every day without anyone noticing. He thought about his own trajectory, his expensive suits, exclusive restaurants, international travel. He thought about all the times he complained about insignificant things. The coffee that arrived lukewarm, the traffic that delayed him by 5 minutes, the air conditioning that wasn't at the right temperature. And he thought of Jiali, who woke up before dawn, took 2 crowded buses, cleaned 3 floors alone, and returned home with her body broken to hug a son who dreamed of being a scientist. "I'm an idiot," he murmured to the window glass. But everyone heard him. No one disagreed. Raymond turned to Jiali. "This man, Victor Wong, he is behind the attack on my company. He taught Calvin how to use the protocol. He planned all this." "Yes," Jiali confirmed. "And he did it using the very tool he stole from you." "Yes." Raymond walked up to her, and for the first time since they had known each other, looked her in the eyes as if he was seeing a human being and not an outsourced employee. "Jiali, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know how I treated you. I know what you think of me. And you would have every right to turn your back and leave now. But," she said, because she knew a but was coming, "but I'm asking for your help, not just to save the company, but to catch this man, to prove what he did to you and to everyone he trampled on to get where he is." Jiali was silent, looking at Raymond. There stood the man who humiliated her every day, pleading for help on his knees, not literally, but with his eyes. And there she was, the invisible woman, with the power to decide the fate of 120 families who depended on that company. "I won't do this for you, Mr. Tan," she finally said. "I'll do it for Brian, for his future, and for all the people in this building who will lose their jobs if this company closes." Raymond nodded in silence. There was nothing to say. There was no way to reciprocate, at least not yet. Jiali returned to the computer and started typing again, but this time it was different. She was no longer just restoring data or tracing transfers. She was following the digital trail of Victor Wong, the man who had taken everything from her and who now, unknowingly, had left his fingerprints on Lion City Capital's system. "I found the destination accounts," she announced after a long period of intense work. "They are accounts registered in tax havens. But there's a pattern in the movements. All pass through an intermediate point before reaching the final destination." "What point?" Raymond asked. Jiali turned the screen once more. "A shell company registered under the name Apex Solutions, and the majority shareholder of this company, according to the records I just accessed, is Victor Wong." "So, we have proof," Raymond said, feeling for the first time that night something that resembled real hope. "We have more than proof," Jiali replied, and there was a new gleam in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was determination. "We have the complete trail. Every cent that left here is documented. Every transfer has a time, destination, and digital signature. With this, the authorities can block the accounts before the money disappears for good." "How much time do we have?" "Little. This type of operation usually has a liquidation window. Once the money is converted and dispersed, it becomes virtually impossible to recover. We need to act now." Raymond picked up the phone and hesitated. Calling the authorities meant exposing everything. The theft, the security failure, Calvin's betrayal, meant publicly admitting that his company had been invaded from within. Lion City Capital's reputation would never be the same. But then he looked at Jiali, a woman who had lost everything, career, marriage, dignity, and yet was sitting there in front of a computer, fighting for people who had never done anything for her. If she had the courage to fight, he needed to have it too. Raymond dialed the number and brought the phone to his ear. This is Raymond Tan from Lion City Capital. I need to report a financial crime, and I need immediate assistance. On the other side of the city, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the same horizon that Raymond contemplated from his office window, a man received a notification on his phone. It was an automatic alert he had configured to monitor any attempt to access the mirror layer of Lion City Capital's system. Victor Wong looked at the screen and felt his blood run cold. Someone had entered, someone had found the data, someone had traced the accounts, and by the style of access, by the way the protocol had been dismantled from the inside out, he knew exactly who it was. Jia Li, he murmured, the name coming out like venom between his teeth. She was back. Victor Wong was not the type of man who panicked. Throughout his career, he had built a reputation based on control of situations, of people, of narratives. Every step he took was calculated with surgical precision. Every move thought 3 plays ahead, like a chess player who never loses because he never plays fair. But that dawn, for the first time in many years, his hands trembled. He paced back and forth in the penthouse, his phone clenched in his hand, his eyes fixed on the notification blinking on the screen. The alert was clear. Someone had penetrated the mirror layer of Lion City Capital's system, restored the data, and traced the destination accounts. In a matter of hours, the entire scheme he had set up for months could collapse. And that access style, that specific way of dismantling the protocol from the inside out, like someone untying a knot she herself had tied, there was no doubt. It was Jia Li. Victor stopped in front of the window and looked at the sleeping city. Somewhere below, in that mirrored building he knew very well, the woman whose life he had destroyed was undoing everything he had built on the rubble of her career. He picked up another phone, a disposable device he used only for untraceable contacts, and dialed a number. "We have a problem," he said when the call was answered. "Someone accessed the mirror layer. We need to accelerate the liquidation of the accounts. Everything now." The voice on the other end said something that made Victor clench his teeth. "I know the deadline was 48 hours. We don't have 48 hours anymore. If that money isn't dispersed before dawn, we lose everything." He hung up without waiting for a response and threw the phone onto the sofa. He needed to think, he needed to act, and above all, he needed to ensure that Jia Li didn't get any further than she already had. Meanwhile, at Lion City Capital's office, the atmosphere was one of tension that seemed to have physical weight. Raymond had hung up the phone after reporting the crime and was now awaiting the arrival of a specialized financial crime team. Patricia organized all the documents that might be needed, and Jia Li continued in front of the computer, immersed in lines of code, tracing every cent that had left the company. The transfers passed through 7 different countries before reaching Apex Solutions accounts, she explained while working. "It's a technique called cascading. The money jumps from account to account, from country to country, to make tracing difficult, but each jump leaves a minimal record, like a footprint in the sand. If you know where to look, you can follow the entire path." "And you know where to look?" Raymond said. It wasn't a question. "I know this technique because I designed it," Jia Li replied, without taking her eyes off the screen. "Victor may have stolen my work, but he never fully understood the architecture behind it. He uses the tools I created, like someone driving a car, without knowing how the engine works. And that's why he makes mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "Small, but fatal. For example, the cascade he set up has a repetitive pattern in the intervals between transfers, always the same time between one jump and another. This is like a signature. Any competent investigator can identify that all movements were made by the same person." Raymond approached the screen and observed the numbers Jia Li pointed out. To him, who understood finance but not technology, it seemed like an impossible tangle to decipher. But, in Jia Li's eyes, each number told a clear story. "There's one more thing," she said, stopping typing for a moment. "The last layer of the cascade is still open. The money reached Apex Solutions accounts, but it hasn't yet been dispersed to the final destinations. It's all sitting in a kind of digital waiting room." "Why is it stopped?" "Because this type of operation has a grace period. The money needs to rest before being converted and fragmented. It's a security measure of the protocol itself, to prevent large movements from attracting the attention of international banking systems." "And how long does this rest period last?" Jia Li looked at the clock on the corner of the screen. "The grace period began when the transfers were completed. If my calculations are correct, the money can be moved from 6 a.m. Raymond felt his stomach drop. 6 a.m.? Just a few hours left. That's why we need the authorities to act quickly. If they can get a warrant to freeze Apex Solutions accounts before that time, the money will be trapped. If they can't, She didn't need to complete the sentence. Everyone knew what it meant. At that moment, Wei Lang appeared at the server room door. No one expected to see her there at that hour. The receptionist should have left a long time ago, but Wei Lang was the kind of person who couldn't go home when she felt something was wrong. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, visibly nervous. "But there's something I need to tell you, and I don't know if it's important." Raymond turned to her. "Speak, Wei Lang." Wei Lang wrung her hands, clearly uncomfortable. "In the last few weeks, I noticed something strange. A man who isn't an employee here came to the building regularly. Always at the end of the workday, when most people had already left. He never went through reception. He entered through the underground parking and came straight up the service elevator." The room fell silent. "I only noticed because one night I forgot my phone at reception and came back for it. I saw him coming out of the service elevator and found it strange because he didn't have a badge, but he saw me looking and smiled. He said he was an external consultant and that Mr. Lim had authorized his entry." Everyone turned to Calvin, who was still sitting in the corner, cowering as if he wished he could disappear. "It was him," Calvin confirmed in a low voice. "Victor came here to guide me on the transfers. He needed physical access to the system at times to configure the cascade." "You let a stranger into the building to access our system?" Raymond asked. The restraint in his voice was almost superhuman. "He gave me no choice, Raymond. He knew about my debts. He knew about the threats. He approached me, not the other way around. One day he appeared in my car when I left work and said he could solve my financial problems. All I needed to do was give him access to the system and follow his instructions." "And you accepted?" Raymond said. "I was desperate. My family was in danger." Wei Lang, who was listening with increasingly wide eyes, raised her hand timidly. "There's more. I saved the parking lot camera footage, not the official company cameras. Those I know, mister. Lim had access to erase, but from the building's own cameras, the ones in a separate system. I always make copies of the recordings because once an employee's car was stolen, and no one had a record." Jia Li turned to Wei Lang with an expression of absolute astonishment. "You have images of him entering the building?" "Yes, with dates and times. Every time he came, I categorized it. If there was a sound for hope being reborn, it would have been the silence that fell at that moment. It was the missing piece. Not just the digital records, not just the account tracing, but visual proof of Victor Wong physically entering the building to execute the crime." "Wei Lang," Raymond said, and his voice carried a respect the receptionist had never received from him in all the years she had worked there. "You may have just saved this company." Wei Lang blushed, not knowing how to react to a compliment from Raymond Tan. I always save the recordings. You never know when you might need them." Jia Li stood up and approached Wei Lang. The two women looked at each other, the cleaner and the receptionist, two people who shared the same invisibility in that office. Jia Li extended her hand and held Wei Lang's firmly. "Thank you," she said simply, and in that single word was more gratitude than in any speech. The next few minutes were frantic activity. Wei Lang brought a thumb drive with the parking recordings. Jia Li organized all the digital data into a structured report. Transfers, accounts, digital signatures, access logs. Patricia gathered the company's financial documentation, proving the stolen amounts. Everything was being prepared for when the authorities arrived. Raymond observed the scene with a lump in his throat. 3 women, a cleaner, a receptionist, and a CFO, working together to save a company run by a man who had never valued any of them. The irony was so heavy it almost didn't fit in that room. "Mr. Tan," Jia Li called, interrupting his thoughts. "I need to inform you of something before the authorities arrive." "What?" When I accessed the mirror layer and started tracing, the system generated an automatic alert. "It's a security feature, Victor programmed to be notified if anyone found the hidden data." Raymond blanched. "He knows you're here. He knows someone dismantled the protocol, and by the style of access, he knows it was me." "And what does that mean?" Patricia added, connecting the dots. "It means he will try to accelerate the dispersion of the money. He will push for the accounts to be emptied before the grace period. Even if it generates banking alerts, he will prefer to lose part of the money than to lose everything. And it also means," Patricia added, "that he knows we have proof against him, and a cornered man is a dangerous man." Jia Li nodded. "He will try to protect himself. He might destroy evidence on his side, he might flee. He might try to shift the blame to someone else. Victor Wong is the kind of man who would rather burn down the entire forest than be caught with a match in his hand. Then, we need to be faster than him," Raymond said. "They do. And there's a way to ensure he doesn't escape." Jia Li returned to the computer and opened a new window. The protocol I created has a function Victor never knew existed. A kind of emergency lock that I programmed as a safeguard in case the system was used for criminal purposes. Calvin raised his head. A lock? That wasn't in the original documentation. Because I never documented it. It was my personal guarantee. If the protocol was used for evil, I wanted a way to stop it. Jia Li typed a long sequence of commands, her fingers moving with controlled urgency. This lock freezes all operations linked to the protocol. No transfers enter, no transfers leave. The money remains trapped exactly where it is, impossible to move until the lock is deactivated. And who can deactivate it? Raymond asked. Jia Li turned in her chair and looked at him with an expression that carried the weight of years of injustice, years of silence, years of waiting for a moment she never planned, but which destiny placed before her. Only I can. She pressed the final key. On the screen, a message appeared in letters that shone against the dark background. Protocol blocked. All operations suspended. On the other side of the city, in the penthouse apartment, Victor Wong received a second notification. This time, it wasn't an alert. It was a total block notice. Every account, every transfer, every cent he had diverted was now frozen, inaccessible, completely out of his reach. He tried to access the system, denied. Tried to use his emergency codes, denied. Tried to activate international contacts to force the release. Everyone reported the same thing. The protocol was locked from within, and no one in the world had the key to unlock it. No one, except the woman he had destroyed. Victor threw the phone against the wall, and the device shattered. He leaned his hands on the table and lowered his head, breathing heavily, his mind racing in search of an escape that didn't exist. For years, he had manipulated, lied, stolen, and destroyed lives without losing a night's sleep. He had stepped on Jia Li as if she were nothing. He had erased her name from history like erasing a typo. He had slept soundly every night, convinced that she would never have the strength to rise. But Jia Li had not only risen, she had locked the cage with him inside. The sky was still dark when the first authority car parked in front of the Lion City Capitol building. It was followed by two more vehicles, all discreet, without sirens, without fanfare. The inspecting officer in charge, Inspector David Tan, went up accompanied by a team of financial crime experts and two specialized technology agents. Raymond received them at reception with the face of someone who hadn't slept in days, although only a few hours had passed since his world had collapsed. Beside him, Patricia held a folder with all the organized documentation. Wei Leng had remained in the building and was preparing coffee in the pantry, because that was the only gesture she knew how to offer at that moment. And sometimes a simple gesture is the most necessary. Mr. Tan, Inspector David greeted with a firm handshake. My team is already aware of the general situation. We need to see the records and speak with everyone involved. Everything is prepared, Raymond replied. But before we go up, you need to know one thing. Who discovered the scheme, who traced the accounts, and who blocked the money? It wasn't me. It wasn't my technology team. It wasn't any hired specialist. David frowned. Who was it? Raymond hesitated for a second, as if the next word still cost him something. It was a cleaning staff member, the office cleaner. The inspector looked at Raymond as if expecting the rest of a joke that didn't come. In the server room, Jia Li continued working. She hadn't stopped since activating the protocol lock. She was organizing every piece of evidence into a structure that any investigator could understand. Access sequence, transfer map, Victor's digital signature, records of the ghost account created by Calvin. Everything documented with the precision of someone who had once written academic papers reviewed by the best in the world. When Inspector David entered the room and saw her sitting in front of 5 open screens, in a cleaning uniform, her fingers dancing over the keyboard with a fluency that his own experts lacked, he understood that this night would be different from any case he had ever investigated. Are you responsible for the tracing? David asked, approaching. Jia Li stood up and extended her hand. Jia Li, cleaner assistant for the outsourced company, and former chief research scientist at the Zenith Institute for Advanced Technology. David shook her hand and, to everyone's surprise, didn't question, didn't doubt, just nodded and said, "Show me everything." And Jia Li showed him. Over the next hour, she led the inspector and his team through each layer of the scheme, with a clarity that left the experts open-mouthed. She explained the encryption protocol, the mirror layer, the cascade of transfers, the shell company Apex Solutions, and the digital signature that linked everything directly to Victor Wong. The experts took notes frantically, exchanging astonished glances. In addition to the digital records, Jia Li added, pointing to Hui Leng, who was at the door. "We have security footage from the building's parking lot, showing the suspect physically entering the premises on several occasions." Hui Leng stepped forward and handed the thumb drive to the inspector. "All dates and times are catalogued. I've separated them chronologically for ease." David took the thumb drive and looked at Hui Leng with the same respect he had shown Jia Li. "You did this cataloging work alone, ma'am?" "Yes, sir. I always save the recordings. It's a habit." "A habit that may have saved $187 million, David replied. Hui Leng smiled for the first time that night, and it was a smile that illuminated the tiredness on her face, like a ray of sunshine breaking through rain clouds. While the experts analyzed the material, David addressed Calvin, who was in the meeting room, under the supervision of 2 agents. The interrogation was brief. Calvin had already decided to cooperate completely. He provided names, dates, details of how Victor had approached him, how the threats began, how the plan was executed step by step. "I know nothing I say will undo what I've done," Calvin told the inspector, his voice laden with a tiredness that went far beyond physical exhaustion. "But if cooperating helps catch whoever really planned all this, then it's the least I can do." David nodded and turned to his team. "We have enough. Prepare the warrant for freezing Apex Solutions accounts and the search and seizure warrant for Victor Wong's address." The words came out like a sentence, and everyone in the room felt their weight. This was real. It was happening. The machine of justice had been activated, and there was no pause button. On the other side of the building, in Raymond's office, something different was happening. Marcus Lee, the youngest analyst, was the first to arrive as dawn broke. He found his boss sitting in his chair, tie loose and eyes red, looking out at the city from the window. "Mr. Tan," Marcus called hesitantly from the door. "Everyone's arriving, and everyone wants to know what's going on. There are authority cars downstairs, and everyone's nervous." "Gather everyone in the main hall," Raymond said, without turning around. Everyone, including the cleaning staff. Marcus found the request strange but obeyed. Minutes later, Lion City Capital's main hall was full. Employees from all sectors, from analysts to interns, from the pantry staff to security. Sharon Tan, from legal, was in the corner with a notepad, ready for any legal eventuality. And at the back of the room, still in her work uniform, was Jia Li, trying to remain invisible, as always. Raymond entered the room and walked to the front. He looked at every face present. 120 people who depended on that company to pay their bills, feed their families, sustain their dreams. 120 people who that morning didn't know if they would still have a job the next day. "I owe the truth to all of you," he began, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "Last night, this company suffered an internal attack. A significant amount of our clients' funds was diverted to overseas accounts. The murmur that swept through the room was like a wave. Faces paled, hands clutched phones, eyes filled with fear. But I also need to say," Raymond continued, raising his hand for silence, "that the money was traced, located, and is currently frozen, awaiting recovery by the competent authorities." The murmur changed tone from fear to confusion, from confusion to cautious hope. "And I need everyone to know who saved this company." Raymond looked to the back of the room, where Jia Li was trying to hide behind a group of employees. When their gazes met, she shook her head slightly, as if asking not to be exposed. But Raymond knew that to remain silent at that moment would be to repeat exactly the crime Victor Wong had committed against her years ago, erasing the name of someone who deserved to be remembered. The person who discovered the attack, traced every stolen cent, and blocked the funds so they could be recovered, was Jia Li. The same Jia Li all of you see every day cleaning these hallways. The same Jia Li most of us never greeted. The same Jia Li whom I personally treated in a way that deeply shames me. The silence in the room was absolute. 120 pairs of eyes turned to the back, where Jia Li stood motionless, her eyes moist and her chin trembling. "Before working here as a cleaner assistant," Raymond continued, "Jia Li was chief research scientist at one of the country's most important technology institutes. She was wronged. Her work was stolen, her career destroyed, and her name erased by people who had power and lacked character. And even after all that, even after being treated as invisible by people like me, she chose to help. Not for me, not for the company, but for you, for every family that depends on the salary that comes from here." Marcus Lee, the youngest analyst, was the first to move. He slowly began to clap, alone. Then Sharon joined, then Hui Leng, and in seconds, the entire room applauded. It wasn't polite corporate meeting applause. It was applause from people who had held on to fear all night and could finally let it go. Jia Li covered her face with her hands. The tears she had held back for years, through all the humiliations, through all the nights sleeping on her mother's floor, through all the days of heavy work without anyone even looking at her, all those tears came out at once. And they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of someone who was finally being seen. Wei Leng approached first and hugged her without saying anything. Then Patricia, then employees whose names she didn't even know, but who came to her with wet eyes and outstretched hands. One by one, those people who for years had passed her without seeing her, now queued up to thank her. Raymond watched from afar, leaning against the wall. And for the first time in his entire life, as a successful businessman, he understood that the most important moment in Lion City Capital's history had not happened in any meeting room, in any million-dollar contract closing, in any celebration of achieved targets. It was happening right there in that room, around a woman in a cleaning uniform whom the whole world had tried to erase. But that morning, as Jia Li was hugged by 120 people she had saved for nothing in return, Raymond's phone vibrated. It was a message from Inspector David. He read it and felt his blood run cold. Team went to suspect's address. Apartment was empty. Victor Wong fled. The news of Victor Wong's escape fell on that morning like a storm on a sunny day. Minutes before, Jia Li was being hugged by 120 people. Now, silence returned to occupy every corner of that office, heavy and suffocating. Raymond put his phone away and looked at Jia Li. She was no longer crying, no longer trembling. She stood in the middle of the room with the expression of someone who knew that man too well to be surprised. "He's going to try to leave the country," Jia Li said with a calm that contrasted with the despair around her. "That's what he always does when things get tough. He flees, changes his name, restarts somewhere else as if nothing happened." "How do you know that?" Inspector David asked by phone, still on the line with Raymond. "Because it's not the first time. When the Zenith Institute started investigating internal irregularities, Victor disappeared for weeks. He only came back when he was sure the evidence against him had been destroyed. He has contacts, fake documents, and prepared exit routes. But this time, he has no money," David mused. "The accounts are frozen. Without resources, his options drastically diminish." "They diminish, but they don't disappear," Jia Li replied. "He's the kind of person who always keeps a hidden reserve, always has a plan within a plan." David was silent for a moment. "Mom, you know his behavioral pattern better than any profile my team could draw. If you were in his place, where would you go?" Jia Li closed her eyes. It was strange. After so many years trying to forget Victor Wong, now she needed to think exactly like him, return to that mind she knew so well, that calculating reasoning that disguised cowardice as strategy. "He won't go to the airport," she said, opening her eyes. "He knows it's the first place to be monitored. He also won't use his usual contacts, because he imagines Calvin has already told everything. Victor will go to the only place where he feels safe enough to think about his next step." "What place?" "His office at Apex Solutions. He set up that company as a refuge. He has alternative documentation stored there, independent communication equipment. It's his cocoon." David didn't hesitate. In less than an hour, the team was positioned at Apex Solutions' commercial address, a discreet office in a business building on the other side of the city. And when the agents entered, they found exactly what Jia Li had described. Equipment, fake documents, passports with different names, and Victor Wong sitting in front of a computer desperately trying to access accounts that no longer responded to his commands. When the agents entered the room, he slowly raised his hands, without resisting. Not because he was brave, but because he finally understood that there was nowhere left to run. The news of the capture reached Lion City Capital that morning. Raymond received the call from the inspector, and, for the first time in that interminable night, took a truly deep breath, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of everything that had happened. He hung up the phone and walked to the server room, where Jia Li was still working, organizing the last records for the forensic team. "They got him," Raymond said from the door. Jia Li stopped typing. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a long moment. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate, just closed her eyes and slowly exhaled, like someone laying down a burden she had carried on her back for years. "It's over," she whispered, and the word seemed strange in her mouth, as if she had never imagined she could say it one day. "It's not over," Raymond replied, entering the room. "It's just beginning." Jia Li looked at him, not understanding. "The external audit arrived 20 minutes ago," he continued. "We presented all the documentation, the restored records, the tracing of the transfers, the proof of the scheme. With the accounts frozen and the person responsible arrested, the fund recovery process has already begun. The auditors confirmed that the company's financial structure is preserved. So, The company survives, Jia said. The company survives, jobs are secure. The 120 families will continue to receive their salaries. Raymond paused. Because of you, Jia shook her head. I just did what needed to be done. No, you did what no one else could do, and you did it for people who never did anything for you. That's not just what needed to be done. That's extraordinary. Raymond pulled up a chair and sat facing her. For the first time, they were on the same level. No office desk between them. No hierarchy. No uniform separating boss from subordinate. Jia, I spent the entire night thinking about everything that happened, and I came to a conclusion I should have reached much sooner. I built a successful company, but I failed as a human being. I treated people as tools. I confused authority with superiority, and the person I most despised was precisely the one who saved me. Mr. Tan, Raymond, he corrected. Just Raymond. Jia was silent, processing that simple gesture that meant more than any speech. I want to make you a proposal, he continued. And before you say anything, know that it's not out of gratitude, nor guilt, nor pity. It's because it would be the smartest decision I've ever made in my life. Jia waited. I want you to take over as Chief Technology Officer of Lion City Capital, Calvin's position, with a competitive salary, profit sharing, and total autonomy to restructure the company's digital security from scratch. The air left Jia lungs, as if someone had opened a window in a room that had been closed for years. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Her eyes filled with tears, not the silent tears she had shed during the night, but tears that came from such a deep place that they seemed to carry everything. The pain, the injustice, the loneliness, the sacrifice, and now, finally, the recognition. I don't know what to say, she managed to articulate. Say yes, Patricia said from the doorway where she stood with Weileng. Both had red eyes and smiled at the same time. For goodness sake, say yes. Jia laughed through her tears, a laugh that was pure relief. I need to think. Need to? You need nothing, Weileng interrupted, entering the room. You've spent years thinking about others. Now just accept this blessing. The laughter that filled that room was the most beautiful sound that office had ever heard. It wasn't the laughter of a corporate meeting or a joke between colleagues. It was the laughter of people who had gone through the worst night of their lives together and emerged on the other side, transformed. All right, Jia said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I accept. Weeks later, Lion City Capital's story had spread far and wide. Victor Wong's capture, the Apex Solutions scheme, the recovery of funds, it all made headlines. But what really caught people's attention wasn't the numbers or the crime, it was Jia story. A brilliant researcher whose work was stolen, career destroyed, and name erased, who lost everything and started from scratch, cleaning offices to feed her son, who, when given the chance to turn her back on those who despised her, chose to extend a helping hand. The Zenith Institute, pressured by the repercussions, was forced to open an internal investigation. Documents Victor had falsified were re-examined. Original records proving Jia authorship in the protocol's development were found on old servers no one had checked. In a few weeks, the Institute's board issued a public statement recognizing Jia as the principal creator of the Advanced Encryption Protocol, officially correcting what should have been corrected years ago. When the note was published, Jia was in her new office at Lion City Capital, the same office where Calvin used to sit. Patricia brought the printed news and placed it on her desk without saying a word. Jia read it in silence, each line weighing like gold, each word returning a piece of the identity that had been ripped from her. She didn't cry this time, she just smiled. A small, tired, but profoundly true smile. It took a while, she said to herself, but it came. Months passed. Lion City Capital not only survived, but prospered. The new security system Jia implemented became a benchmark in the financial sector. Companies from all over the country contacted them for consulting, wanting to understand how that architecture worked. The irony was lost on no one. The same protocol that almost destroyed the company was now its greatest competitive differentiator in the right person's hands. Raymond changed. Not overnight, because people don't change like that, but gradually and genuinely. He began greeting every employee by name, reorganized the company's salary policy, created a training program for outsourced employees, offering courses and growth opportunities. And every time someone asked why he had changed so much, he gave the same answer. Because a cleaner taught me that a person's value is never in the badge they wear. Calvin cooperated fully with the investigations and answered for his actions before the law. His collaboration helped dismantle Victor's entire network of accounts. In his testimony, he uttered a sentence that was recorded in the proceedings. "I made a terrible mistake, but the person who suffered the most from all this was the one who chose to help instead of seeking revenge." Victor Wong was convicted. Financial fraud, embezzlement, document forgery, intellectual property theft. The list was long, and so was the sentence. When the verdict was read in court, Jia Li was present not to celebrate, not to seek revenge, but to finally close a chapter of her life that needed to be ended so that another could begin. Leaving the courthouse, she found Raymond waiting outside. He said nothing, just handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter from the dean of one of the country's most respected universities, inviting Jia Li to deliver a lecture on digital security and technological innovation. The suggested topic: the protocol that changed the industry and the woman behind it. Jia Li held the letter to her chest and took a deep breath. The air had never felt so light. One afternoon, days later, Jia Li returned home early. She opened the door to her apartment, a new apartment in a safe neighborhood with a room just for Brian, and found her son at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and notebooks. Jia Li's mother, Madame Lim, was in the armchair nearby, knitting in silence, as she did every afternoon. Brian looked up when he heard the door, and his eyes lit up, as they always did when his mother arrived. He ran to her and hugged her with that clumsy strength only a child has. "Mummy, the teacher asked us to write about what we want to be when we grow up. I wrote that I want to be a scientist just like you." Jia Li knelt down and held her son's face in her hands. She looked into his eyes, those curious eyes that questioned everything, that wanted to understand the whole world, and felt something that no professional achievement, no public recognition, no salary could ever give. "You'll be whatever you want, my son, whatever you want, and no one will ever erase your name." Brian smiled without understanding the weight of those words, but Jia Li understood. She understood like someone who had carried the weight on her back and could finally put it down. Madame Lim looked at her daughter from the armchair, her eyes moist above her reading glasses, and said softly, almost to herself, "I always knew you would find your way back, my daughter." Jia Li smiled at her mother, sat on the floor beside her son, and helped him with his homework. There, in that simple kitchen, with her mother knitting in the armchair and her son beside her, she finally understood one thing it had taken her years to learn: that a person's value is not in the position they hold, the degree they carry, or the money in their account. It is in what they do when no one is looking. It is in the choice to help when they had every right to turn their back. It is in the courage to remain standing when the whole world tries to bring them to their knees. Jia Li was no longer the invisible woman. She never had been. The world just didn't know how to look.